Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
The 2018 Farm Bill is starting to get some press as Congress has begun working on it. And everyone's been pretty skeptical this winter about getting it passed because we all remember how long it took to pass the 2014 bill. But that bill did have some pretty significant changes implemented.
So joining us today is a relatively new hire into the OSU Department of Agriculture, Environmental and Developmental Economics. Ben Brown manages the farm management program in the department and has been following farm policy closely, including the Farm Bill. And we really appreciate you keeping us up to date as things change. So the current Farm Bill expires on October 1st, Ben. What options does Congress have?
Yeah, so coming up, leading up to this, we had kind of heard rumblings, especially on the House side with House Chairman Mike Conaway, a Republican of Texas, that there was even the possibility of getting a farm bill passed in 2017. That was his goal. He kept repeatedly saying that we'd have it done on time, before time, with even the possibility of getting it done a year early. Here we are in 2018. We're getting later in the calendar year. It is May, but we're getting later in the calendar year. The current Farm Bill is set to expire October 1st at the end of the budget year. So the fiscal budget year ends the last day of September. We start a new one come October. And really, it's kind of in this, I'm going to call it an exciting period in terms of farm policy, right? Because we've got things coming into play. Things are changing very quickly, but we've also got this hard deadline. And as a reminder to folks, farm bills are amendments of permanent legislation. The farm bills of 1939 and 1948 serve as our permanent legislation. And so if nothing new is passed, we revert back to our permanent legislation. A couple of big things that play into that: we didn't grow very many soybeans in the country in the 1930s and 1940s. In fact, very, very few. And so there's not a soybean program. There is some loan programs here and there, but there really isn't a soybean safety net program like what we know today. And then the other big thing is the marketing programs around milk and dairy. When we were doing the 14 Farm Bill, as Elizabeth mentioned, when we were doing the 14 Farm Bill, there was a lot of hurdles. One of the things that kept coming out of that one that was a big issue was if nothing was done and we didn't do any extension, milk prices on the shelf at the grocery store could get upwards of $30. I haven't seen any estimates yet this year, but we're still faced with a very similar thing. If we do nothing, if Congress does nothing, we'll let the current Farm Bill expire and we revert back to our permanent legislation. We don't have a soybean program, and our milk prices at the grocery store would substantially go up for consumers. So that's one option: to do nothing, revert back to permanent legislation. Another option is to pass an extension. And that's what we largely did this last go-around. The Farm Bill that was supposed to be the 2012 Farm Bill made some big, significant changes to the wheel. We got rid of the direct payments, the direct decoupled payments that farmers had received since the 1990s, and 1996 is when those first came into play. And then we replaced them with counter-cyclical programs in the agriculture risk coverage and the price loss coverage program. There was a couple of things that played into that long and lengthy period. There was big disagreement from non-agriculture districts and non-agricultural legislators as to what the safety net should look like. There was difference among commodity groups, especially your Midwestern commodities and your Southern commodities, so like corn and soybeans versus peanuts and rice. There was big differences there. You saw differences in the Senate and you saw differences in the House. And it wasn't just a Republican and a Democrat debate. We saw rural districts and urban districts. We saw moderate Democrats that were in the mix. And so it was a lengthy period. The Farm Bill was set to expire in 2012. We ended up extending it a couple of times all the way into 2014 when we got a new bill, right? So we can do that again this year. The Farm Bill is set to expire here at the end of this year in October 1st, and we could do another extension. Whether that looks like a year, whether that looks like 2 years, that'll be up to Congress. And so we could do an extension. That's the second possibility. The third possibility is to pass a new Farm Bill before the day. And obviously I think that would be preferable to everybody, and we would love to have something. reduces the uncertainty around farming. We've got farmers all across the great state of Ohio that are in the field right now planting crops, getting ready for the season. It is nice to know that for at least their programs, right? So the program year, even though the Farm Bill expires in October, the marketing year for these commodities extends all the way until September of 2019. So at least the marketing year, so the crops are going in the ground right now. We at least have the understanding of the rules, if you will. If we get much past October, we don't have a new farm bill, we're doing an extension, we've got people starting to make decisions, right? In agriculture, we've got farmers that buy seeds early. They take advantage of that cash price option to buy seeds, right? They're going to be buying seeds for the 2019 planting season, which then doesn't have a program year, right? And the program year would start at the end and it would go through, and that's what we don't have. And so as we get closer to when farmers are making decisions about next year's plantings, that's where some of this uncertainty will come about. So I really see three paths forward. An extension. I see getting a farm bill done this year, and then if they don't do anything, we revert back. So those are really the three options. I think the most likely option is the extension, a 1-year extension, and it could be something to where in this lame duck period, right? So after the November elections, into the winter months. We have a conference committee. We might have a chance to move something there. But right now, we're moving later in the calendar year, later in the political season, right? This is a year divisible by 2, so all the House districts are up for re-election, and a third of the Senate races are up, or Senate seats are up for re-election. And so we're getting later in the year. Here in July, a lot of them are going to be returning back home to their districts to campaign. So our window to get something passed this year before the deadline is really quickly approaching, and is really starting to get squeezed, to be honest with you. And so, I think an extension is looking more and more likely all the time, and we'll just see what happens. So,
okay. All right. So Ben, how you spoke about the elections coming up and that making it likely that they're going to go with an extension option, but how do those elections play into how the Farm Bill is going to look?
Yeah, so just a little bit of a recap, kind of where we're at this point. We have the House Representatives have released their bill, and it has passed the Ag Committee in the House, and it is waiting for a floor vote in the House Representatives. And that's kind of where we're at. The Senate hasn't released their bill, but potentially for it anytime now. But the House is kind of sitting there waiting a little bit to see if they have the votes, to make sure they have the votes to get the bill through the House. This bill in the House is it's more bipartisan than we've had in a long time, not bipartisan, partisan. It's more partisan than we've had in a long time, especially on the Republican side. Chairman Conaway led a lot of the negotiations. Has said that him and ranking member Colin Peterson, a Democrat from Minnesota, had talked through some of the process, and then when it came time for a committee vote, the Democrats were largely unhappy with the bill, and that was presented to them in committee. There was very little discussion around the bill in committee because the Democrats felt that it was a pretty unworkable bill. They didn't offer any amendments, and then there wasn't a single vote of Democratic support for the bill. And so the bill passed with solid Republican vote. It's not expected to get many Democratic votes in the House. And so you're starting to hear rumblings. The Democrats at least feel like there's a decent shot that they could regain control of the House in the November elections. And so you're starting to hear rumblings from people saying, hey, if we can just extend the Farm Bill past November, at least on the Democratic side, we have a chance to write a bill that's more favorable to our likings, right? And change some of the things that are currently in the House bill. The Republicans are accusing the Democrats of delaying the process. The Democrats are saying, hey, you did a bill without really our input and our support. We want to change that and make it a little more favorable to our interests. And so when I think about this November's election, depending on where we are at that time, if we've got a farm bill through both houses, we're in conference committee, maybe the elections don't really play into it that much. If we're still kind of sitting here kind of like a stick in the mud, just kind of like, we know it's coming, we haven't got an agreement, we're still maybe back in each chamber, right? We don't have a bill passed in either chamber. There is the possibility that the November elections could change the look and the feel, if you will, of this farm bill. In no way, shape, or form do I know which house is going to reclaim the majority, but I do think that the Democrats think they have a decent shot at claiming the majority and retaining committee leadership, and they're thinking that they have a good chance to write a bill that's more favorable to their interest. And when I say more favorable to their interest, one of the key issues that they have with the current House bill is around the work requirements to the supplemental nutrition program, which some people remember that as the old food stamps program. The House bill this go around calls for stricter work requirements for SNAP recipients. It requires almost all adults under the age of 60, and then adults, even with children now, above the age of 6, to work or be engaged in a work training program at least 20 hours a week. And so the Democrats feel like that's going to roll a lot of people off into extreme malnourishment and increase hunger across the country. The Republicans are saying, this is a way to get people to work and basically shrink the size of the program cost. And so there is some disagreements. That's kind of the big one. There's others, but that's kind of the big one, and the Democrats would really like their chance to reform that, maybe a little bit more to their liking. But it would be the same case if we were sitting here and the Democrats were in control and the bill looked different and the Republicans felt that they had a chance come November to win the election. They might be trying to push it a little bit further until after the election. So, yeah.
Yeah. We've seen that a lot with politics these days, it seems like. So with the introduction of new programs in the last Farm Bill, do you think there'll be a lot of changes to the programs for this new one?
Yeah, so in 2012, and you're going to hear me reference the last Farm Bill a little bit, and part of the reason why is every once in a while, about every, let's say 20 years, 20 years, we've had these big reforms to farm bills, basically. The last time it was in 1996, where we introduced the direct decoupled payments, where payments were based on historical plantings on a piece of land. Each piece of land had a certain commodity associated with it. Every year, Congress assigned a payment that went with the different commodities, and if you owned 100 acres of base acres of corn, you got the payment that was associated with corn, no matter what the market price, no matter what you raised. I mean, that it was decoupled, and it was based on historical plantings. The 2012, what ended up being the 2014 Farm Bill, we were in a time period with very high farm incomes across the country, and historical. We haven't seen that ever, and there was a lot of pressure from non-farm legislators that rep non-farm districts or states, of why farms were getting very high farm incomes from the market, but then also getting these direct decoupled payments on top of it, and it just kind of became politically unstable, impossible to retain those payments, and so Congress revolutioned again. We reinvented the wheel. We got rid of the direct decoupled payments. We went to the two programs, the PLC and the ARC County that I mentioned earlier. And that's where we're working on right now. A couple of things. The reason I would be surprised, and everything that's leading up to this right now, is that those programs are going to remain close to the same as what they are now, with maybe some changes, some improvements, some adaptation to current times. But we're not going to see the total reinventing of the wheel like what we saw in the last one, just because people are still tired. It was a long process. People are still tired. And generally, people are happy with what they have. Corn and soybean producers across Ohio, the programs made payments when we needed to make payments, and really kind of helped level out and stabilize farm revenue, farm incomes. The big issues was in cotton and dairy. Cotton was left out of the farm programs because of a lawsuit with Brazil, an anti-dumping and a trade case with the World Trade Organization. Brazil won the case, and so cotton was given their own program. It was called STAX, and it was their own program, and it largely just didn't work the way people had hoped it was. It was very much an extension on a crop insurance plan, and it just really didn't work. And so cotton producers just really felt that they got left out of the 2014 Farm Bill. The other big one was dairy. So the new the margin protection program that we got in the 14 Farm Bill was again a revenue plan. Farmers had to sign up and pay a premium to get into the program, and the premiums just weren't large. The payouts that farmers received just weren't large enough for farmers, or often enough for farmers to pay a premium to enter in the program, and so very few did, and it was almost irrelevant of a program. And so both groups, cotton and dairy, were very unhappy with their programs that we had in the 14 Farm Bill, and they were really largely driving the push for a new Farm Bill this time. Corn and soybean farmers are, like I said, they were getting payments when we needed them to get payments. You didn't hear a lot from southern commodities either, in rice and peanuts, especially not peanuts. Peanuts did very well in the 14 Farm Bill. But cotton and dairy were leading the charge, and they wanted to do something for that. Earlier this year, in January and February, we passed a new budget bill for what is the 2018 budget year, which was supposed to start in October 1st of 17. And so we kept doing these little, I call them Band-Aid bills, but what they are, they're extended spending bills, basically, for a couple of weeks at a time until we could pass a longer spending bill. And finally, in February, we passed a spending bill. One of the things that spending bill did, not only did it keep the government funded for the rest of the year, but it also created new funding for cotton and dairy in the Farm Bill. And so up to that point, if we were going to go in, reopen the Farm Bill, and make some adjustments, there's a certain baseline funding that the Farm Bill has to remain under. And so if you were to increase the payout or the dollar amount to one program, it comes at the expense of another one. And there was large disagreements. One of the possibilities was to increase cotton and dairy at the expense of lowering corn and soybean payments. By coming in with a new budget bill, it provided new money, about $1 billion for cotton, and a couple $100 million for dairy, and it kind of fixed the issue that some people had with the programs. But what it did, the big thing that it did, was it really lessened the dissatisfaction with the current bill. So, at this time, you'd expect to hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, we need a farm bill. We need a fix, and we need a safety net, and we need support." It's very silent around the country. People are happy. Dairy and cotton kind of got a fix, and so I really honestly don't see a lot to change in this one. If there could be potentials, obviously Congress can do whatever they want, and there are disagreements, especially around the two programs. The House seems to favor the PLC program, whereas the Senate favors the ARC program, or the ARC County program, and so there will be disagreements, and we could end up with a compromise in a conference committee if we get to that point. But I really honestly just don't see a lot of changes, at least to the commodity titles. We could see, I'm going to kind of jump to Conservation Reserve Program for just a second, in periods where we see low prices, and I'm going to go back to the 2014 Farm Bill for just a second. So in the 14 Farm Bill, we had high revenue across the country. There were high prices associated with a lot of commodities, and some farmers got stuck in the trap. I don't want to say trap. Trap's not the right word, but they were in contracts with their land for the Conservation Reserve Program, which tied their land into a contract for 10 years to leave it fallow. And while they were getting compensated at the average rent for the county, right, it was largely still below what farmers could make if they were actually planting and raising a corn and soybean crop. So there was actually pressure to lower the CRP cap. We lowered it to 24 million acres in 2014, which is the lowest it's been since the program started back in the 80s. It continued to go up, and then the high prices kind of kept dropping it down. We're now at 24. We're capped at 24 million acres right now. This Farm Bill, I think, will increase it. Right? We've got low prices. One of the ways to combat low prices is lower supply, and so if you're taking land out of production, putting it into a conservation program, one, it makes your wildlife and gaming people happy because they've got more land for birds and pheasants and everything to hunt. It takes land out of production to help raise prices on lower production. But the couple of things that it does that are on the other side of the coin is you're taking land that had traditionally been lower quality, lower margin, cheaper ground, and that's what young farmers and ranchers have traditionally cut their teeth on. They've been able to buy that and get started in farming. If you're increasing the cap, that's taking land that young farmers and ranchers starting out could potentially buy. the other thing you're doing is you're lowering your own production as a country. We're lowering our production as the United States. But Brazil, Argentina, Russia especially, they're not lowering their production, but they're getting the higher price. And so we're providing kind of an umbrella, if you will, for Argentina, Brazil, and Russian producers on the higher prices from the CRP. So there are some negatives, there's some drawbacks. The other thing is, how do you pay for it? Mm-hmm. They do have a couple of ways, at least in the House version of the bill, to pay for that. One of them is as you take land out of production, one, you're not getting the crop insurance premiums that the government kicks in. You're not getting the commodity payments that, the PLC and Ark County payments that come along with it. So that is freeing up some money to help pay for that set-aside program. But it's not quite enough. And so one of the ways that the House bill worked to address that was, instead of being an average equal to the average of the county and rental rates, they dropped it down to 80%. And so the current rate as it stands, now this could change, but the current rate that it stands in the House bill is for 80% of the county average would be your CRP payment. But it does raise the limit up to 29 million acres. Again, that's largely, we can kind of expect that given the negative correlation with prices, commodity prices. So
yeah, I've been wondering about that, because we were pretty close to maxing out those acres at the end of last year, bumping up against that cap, right, the 24 million. And I think some people were thinking there might be some of those, with those contracts ending, some of that land coming back into production, but with current prices, I don't know what those predictions are, if there's going to be a lot of land coming out, if they're waiting to see, or if they think those contracts will be renewed.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, and you're right. Last year we were under the cap, but we were really close. We were really close again this year. We were sitting, I think it was like 23,900,000. I mean, we were really close to the cap. When that cap went in place in 2014, it was there. I mean, the cap was there, but we were still like 28 million acres across the country enrolled in the program, because they're on contracts, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've got to wait until some of those contracts start coming off, to work that land down. So we're just now getting down to that cap of 23 million. And you are right, like, so the last couple of years, and we've been there, we've been at the cap, we've maxed out the acreage. And you're right. I mean, the returns per acre for commodities have been low. I mean, it wasn't just that long ago that many places around the country were receiving a negative return for corn. In fact, that was just 2 years ago for some parts of the country. We're receiving a negative return for corn. And those were largely, that could have been land that was in CRP if the program had been extended. There are possibilities. But we see that we're seeing the price, the price decline from the last couple of years, and farmers are thinking that CRP could be a possibility. However, we are starting to see a little bit of a rally in prices, and so how that'll figure into farmers' decisions. I love farmers. I work with them all the time, and I wish I knew what they thought. But it'll be a farm level decision, and if they choose to enter into that. If they feel like there's a benefit to entering into a contract for CRP and basically taking away the opportunity for prices to really rally and them to receive the high benefits again, that's kind of what they're banking on. They're trying to estimate, okay, over the lifetime of my contract, what do I think commodity prices are going to do for the next 5, 10, 15 years? So it'll depend on a number of things, but historically CRP land has been focused on poor quality, cheap land that maybe was in, I'm going to call it wind erosion type places, so western Kansas, Iowa, highly erodible land. CRP traditionally hasn't had a focus on water quality. As we know, here in Ohio, we do have an issue with water quality. A lot of people seem to think that comes from runoff and different things, and it could be interesting if Congress wants to put an incentive, I guess, to improve water quality. And one of the ways they could possibly do that is putting an emphasis in CRP registration around land that drains into lakes and streams, and we could see more CRP registration here in Ohio, which we haven't traditionally had. While we have acreage in Ohio enrolled in the program, it's not near as high as some of our surrounding states, well below Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. But we could see an enrollment or an increase if they make that a priority of the program.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I haven't followed that or paid attention. I see CRP around, especially along some of those floodplain areas. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we get more here in Ohio compared with other states.
The other thing is, it's right. There's an amount of money that you have available to the program, and land in Ohio is not cheap. It's Do you want to enroll 10 acres in Ohio in a program, or do you want to have the chance to enroll, maybe 100 in Wyoming or something like that? And so they play those games too. And so land prices and land rental rates will definitely figure into the equation as well.
Okay.
So Ben, over the last year or two, there have been some concerns about cuts to crop insurance. What is the latest on the potential for changes to crop insurance?
So crop insurance, I feel, is always kind of caught in this, I don't want to call it crosshairs, because maybe that's not the correct term, but, crop insurance is disliked by members of the far left in the Democratic Party because they feel like it is an unfair subsidy to farmers in relation to a homeowner, right? So you don't get a subsidy for your insurance policy for your car or your house. It's also disliked by members of the far right, people that, the same people that are out to make changes and reforms to the nutrition title also really don't like crop insurance. And so crop insurance gets kind of attacked on both sides. It's not liked by the Democratic Party. It's not liked very well by the right wing of the Republican Party. And so it continues to face challenges, to save it. A couple of the proponents' arguments for crop insurance is, if you and I are driving a car and I get in a wreck, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a wreck. The probability of you getting in a wreck really doesn't change. But if you and I own fields, a mile apart, and I have a severe drought, the possibility of you having a drought is also, it changes, right? There's a greater possibility. And so, for proponents of crop insurance subsidies, one of their things is for affordability purposes and just the vast scope of the range that hailstorms or droughts or floods affect, there's got to be some type of safety net. And the discussion all these years has always been on, not necessarily should there be a safety net, with crop insurance being the safety net, but how big should the holes in the safety net be, if you will. Currently, our national average for crop insurance premiums from the government is 62%. That for every dollar that comes in to a crop insurance program, the farmer kicks in 38% or 40% if I'm rounding up, and the government kicks in 60%. That's not every policy because there's different ranges and there's different choices, but the national average for all the programs is 62%. There's a lot of people that would like to lower that number, including the administration. Mulvaney, the budget director that used to be a congressman from North Carolina, he was very much in favor of cutting the crop insurance program. And you saw that in the president's budget the last 2 years. So the 2018 budget, he called for removal of the harvest price exclusion. Then he went in, he spoke at the American Farm Bureau Conference in Nashville this year, got up and said, I'm a big proponent of crop insurance. We're not going to cut crop insurance. Just a couple of weeks after that, his budget came out again, and it had the cuts to crop insurance in the budget again, right? And so, the administration's been proposing crop insurance. The House bill that's currently ready for a House floor vote doesn't make any changes to crop insurance. However, there has been word that the congressman that took over Mulvaney's seat in the House is potentially going to propose a bill or an amendment to make some changes to crop insurance. Obviously, like I said, the extreme right and the far right, they're happy right now with the changes to the nutrition program to some extent, not all the changes to the nutrition title, but they would also really like to make changes to the crop insurance program. However, when doing that, you lose some representatives and senators that are in favor of the program. Pat Roberts, chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, is a very big proponent of crop insurance. Loves the program, is going to do anything he can to protect it. And so he's come out and said we have to keep the program, or I'm not going to vote for the bill. And so to say that crop insurance is going to make it through unscathed, I think is anybody's guess at this point, because as I mentioned, Congress can do whatever it wants, and the bill could potentially change a lot between now and when it eventually gets passed. But crop insurance, like the nutrition program, face very similar hurdles. The one difference might be that crop insurance has both sides of the aisle sometimes looking at it in a poor light. And so, whatever happens, you'll hear people also talk about requiring drug testing for nutrition people, and that gets a lot of support in rural communities around the country. However, urban legislators and Democratic committee members, and even Republican committee members for that, or not committee members, but legislators, will come back and say, okay, if we're going to do drug testing for nutrition programs, we also need to do drug testing for crop insurance recipients, right? And then they come back and say, well, no, we didn't mean that, and they kind of drop it. And so we haven't necessarily had that come forward yet on either side, on nutrition or crop insurance. But it's always something that's proposed until people realize, or until people suggest that they do the same for crop insurance, and then people start backing off a little bit. So I look for crop insurance and nutrition programs that kind of get through. If I was to take a stance, I think they both kind of make it through, just on the philosophy that both sides have one great argument for their case, and I say great because everybody seems to be very supportive of lessening the federal deficit, and the economy has recovered. People are back to work. Our unemployment rate is at the lowest. We're at full employment at 4% unemployment rate, but the SNAP program has cheapened. As people have gone to work, less people are enrolled in SNAP. The participants have gone down. The program's cheaper, right? So proponents of the SNAP program, will say, hey, we've cheapened our expense to the federal government. Crop insurance proponents have the same argument. Corn is a heck of a lot cheaper to insure at $3.50 instead of $6.50. And so the program expenses for crop insurance have also come down. And so I think both sides make the argument, hey, we've cheapened our programs. It is now cheaper than what it was this last go around. We've got more people enrolled in the programs. Why are you picking on us? Why are you cutting our program and not the other? And so depending on what happens in the conference committee, I could see both programs making it through. So
I think that's good news for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Another topic that is on everyone's mind right now is trade. Could you give us a quick update on where we stand?
Yes, I feel like this has been my life the last couple of weeks. Not to go into too much detail, but we are seeing a lot of uncertainty around trade. Both administrations, both candidates, Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump, when they were running for president, both of them came out very much against TPP, so they were going to pull us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Which was a partnership with us and 11 other countries in the Pacific Rim. The big one obviously being Japan. The access to the Japanese market, especially for beef, was going to be very, very beneficial for U.S. beef producers. Sticking true to his word, President Trump pulled us out of the deal. And so, we don't have TPP. A couple weeks ago, he made kind of some off-the-cuff remarks about possibly rejoining TPP, and then he kind of walked back from those. So there's one uncertainty. The one volley that I'm going to throw in the air is kind of the uncertainty around, are we going to rejoin TPP? Are we not? Are we going to stay out? Part of the thing that really kind of came back to bite us a little bit was everybody felt that, or I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people felt that the United States, if they pulled out of TPP, the rest of the deal would kind of dissolve, and that would open up the possibility for some of these bilateral trade agreements that we hear talked about between us and another country. What ended up happening was the U.S. pulled out, and then the other 11 countries went ahead and ratified the deal. And so that's major. I mentioned Japan. This is outside. China's outside the TPP. They weren't one of the 11 member countries, but Canada, Mexico, they were all part of the process. The countries went ahead and ratified. U.S. beef producers face a very strong tariff or tax for beef imports into the Japanese market. Australia, the country's other major supplier of beef, is a part of TPP, and they get reduced tariffs, right? So it gives them a competitive advantage to sell beef into the market. And if the United States doesn't do a bilateral trade agreement or rejoin TPP, we're going to see our market share, especially in beef to Japan, continue to taper off, just because we're not as competitive. I mean, we can't be competitive when we're faced with a 25% tariff, and Australia and New Zealand are at a far less tariff, or in some cases zero tariffs. And so that's the first uncertainty I'm going to throw out there about trade. The second thing is with the North American Free Trade Agreement with the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The agreement, NAFTA, is actually 3 separate bilateral trade agreements all together as one. So it's an agreement. There's an agreement with the United States and Mexico. There's one with the United States and Canada, and there's one with Canada and Mexico. But they're all kind of in a deal, and there's a lot of issues around it. NAFTA has been very good for agriculture since its enactment in the 90s, and it's increased our trade to the countries. The flow of goods across the borders has increased for agriculture. A couple of the big sticking points within NAFTA is related to Canada's dairy supply management. So they have lots of supply. They basically help inflate the price of milk in Canada, and some of those milk products come in the United States, which deflates our domestic milk price. So that's one area of contention. There's contention around automobile parts and how much of each car that's traded across borders can pass without a tariff. What the percentage breakdown of that is. There's disagreement about what those percentages. How much should come from the United States? How much from Mexico? How much from Canada? And then the other thing is related to seasonal approaches for fruits and vegetables with us in Mexico. So there's a kind of a during one of the negotiation talks with NAFTA, Mexico had proposed during peak growing seasons, we want to be able to sell into the market, or we want to be able to limit the United States exports of tomatoes into Mexico during certain times of the year. And so they had to work through those issues. And so we keep hearing the administration say that they're getting close to a deal. For corn and soybean producers in Ohio, honestly, we had free trade already across the border, and so a new NAFTA is really not going to change that picture. But for dairy producers in the state, there could be a benefit to a new NAFTA. Obviously, if we pull from NAFTA, then those tariffs for some of our corn and soybeans would go back into place, and we'd see potentially less trade across the border. And so a deal is good, a deal is beneficial, but we already have free trade with corn and soybeans, and so recouping that deal isn't going to change the picture a lot. Losing the deal would change it significantly. And then the third thing, I'm going to throw Korean. So we have a free trade agreement with South Korea. The deal has been finalized, but it hasn't been signed yet, largely in part to help to bring North Korea back to a state of playing fair with others. And so the deal's, to our understanding, is done. It just hasn't been signed by the president yet, largely putting pressure on North Korea to come to the table as well. So there's 3. The fourth one, the big one that we've heard about in the news over and over again the last couple weeks, is related to China. And currently the only tariffs that we have in place, currently the only Chinese tariffs are in place on agriculture. The big one being pork. So 25% on pork. The day it was announced, we saw the markets jump down. We saw the markets, we lost about 60 cents in soybeans. When people started to realize that this was all proposed and the tariffs weren't actually in place, we saw the market start to come back. So we had about a 100-cent swing, 60 cent down, 40 cent back up in soybeans. 100-cent swing, that's pretty significant day. And the markets, at least for soybeans, have been kind of trading flat the last couple of weeks. We've seen a rally in corn, largely a couple of things driving that: higher feed usage, and then the drought in South America and Argentina has really kind of blustered some of our corn markets. But as far as our trade with China and where we could end up with that, I'm hopeful that the administration and really the United States and China come to a deal, whatever type of deal there is, and these tariffs don't go into place. China is our number one soybean market. They account for about 30% of our total soybean production. If the tariffs go into place, my estimates are that it could drop to 20% or about 1 in 5 of our total production. So a pretty significant loss. We could see a drop in short-term prices around the world. And obviously, in some cases we're close to cost of production for farms, and so a drop in prices of that magnitude would definitely have negative effects for producers. And it really came. I kind of mentioned this earlier a little bit. One of the ways to cut low prices is to cut your supply. And this year, the last couple years, we've seen prices kind of continue down, but we haven't seen that adjustment on the supply side. We were still planting large amounts of soybean acreage, still planting large amounts of corn acreage across the country. This year, when the planting report came out, we saw those. If you're a U.S. producer, we got what we wanted. We got the drought in South America. And not here in the United States yet. But we also had the decrease in acreage. We saw gains in cotton, we saw gains in some sorghum, but we saw the reduced acreage in corn and soybeans, which put upward pressure on corn and soybean prices. With this tariff uncertainty in China, we've kind of lost some of that momentum. I mean, we're still trending up on corn, but we lost kind of some of that momentum. And so in terms of trade with China, I'm hopeful that we get a deal and these tariffs don't go into place. But if they do, we could see a drop in the short term for prices, and farmers will have to adjust accordingly. I mean, there's nothing to do. The government could step in and provide some payments to help subsidize until we get back on stable footing. But I've heard, as I've traveled the state, one of the things I keep hearing over and over again from commodity groups and from farmers alike is, we'd rather have free trade than program payments, than government payments. And so I think the administration realizes that trade is important to the agriculture economy, and they're going to continue to work on good, solid deals. So.
Yeah, hopefully we do see that, because that is important to us.
Yeah.
Any resources you'd like to share with our listeners?
In terms of markets, in terms of policy, or
Your website. I know you guys have the department website.
So in the Department of Agriculture, Environmental Development, and Economics, we do try our best to provide market updates, and we try to provide policy updates. We've got an article getting ready to come out around the tariffs and the trade. It'll be really interesting to people, we hope, and kind of explain some of the challenges that are being faced with these tariffs in the short term. So if you're interested, it's aede@osu.edu. We also have a farm management page. And then the extension has a great website called the Farm Office, where they put a lot of budgets and resources available to farmers, ag law, and farm succession planning, along with a lot of the things that we talked today about policy and trade. So that's a good resource as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to explain all of this to us, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.